Vallow. You are sentenced to the custody of the State Board of Corrections to serve the maximum allowed sentence, a fixed, determinate life imprisonment sentence with no possibility of parole. I'll next address the 3 conspiracy counts you've been convicted of. And note, under Idaho Code 18-1701, the punishment for those crimes is the same as the underlying offenses you combined to commit. One of the offenses you combined to commit was first-degree murder, so those may be punishable also by imprisonment for life. When I look at what the appropriate sentences should be for the conspiracy charges, at first I wondered if they should be as long of a term or serious as the substantive murder charges. However, what I've concluded is that these conspiracy convictions merit the same grave punishment for several reasons. First, the conspiracies in which you engaged in have had far-reaching impacts on many people besides the deceased victims. And with what the court's heard, I am convinced that the conspiracy charges also merit the same serious sentence. So on count 1, the conspiracy to commit first-degree murder of Tylee Ryan and grand theft by deception, you're sentenced to the custody of the State Board of Corrections to serve the maximum allowed sentence, a fixed, determinate term of life imprisonment with no possibility of parole. On count 3, the conspiracy to commit first-degree murder of Joshua Jackson Vallow and grand theft by deception, you're sentenced to the custody of the State Board of Corrections to serve the maximum allowed sentence, a fixed, determinate term of life imprisonment with no possibility of parole. And on count 5, the conspiracy to commit the first-degree murder of Tammy Daybell, you're sentenced to the custody of the State Board of Corrections to serve the maximum allowed sentence, a fixed, determinate term of life imprisonment with no possibility of parole. Finally, the court will address count 7, which is the charge of grand theft. On that charge, court is going to sentence you to a fixed, determinate term of 5 years of prison, followed by an indeterminate term of 5 years of prison, for a total 10-year term of imprisonment on the grand theft. Court will next consider whether sentences should be imposed consecutively or concurrently. I generally don't, I'm a pragmatic person, and I've struggled with the point of a consecutive sentence when in Idaho, a life sentence is just that, a life sentence without parole. And I've thought it through. However, when I've looked at this case and the more I thought about it, I've determined that because there are 3 separate murders with 3 separate victims that occurred at 3 separate times, then running counts concurrently would not serve the interests of justice, because those crimes all need to be taken into account separately and distinctly and individually. And you need to be held accountable separately for each of the 3 murders. So on those counts, the court will run consecutively the count 2 murder of Tylee Ryan, consecutive to count 4, the murder of Joshua Jackson Vallow, and count 5 will run consecutive to count 2 and 4, the conspiracy to commit first-degree murder of Tammy Daybell. So 3 consecutive life terms of prison. The remaining counts will be concurrent to the counts that are consecutive. The court will impose fines as requested by the state in the amount of $25,000 for all counts except the grand theft. On the grand theft, the fine will be in the amount of $1,000. The court will assess the civil penalty that was requested, and I find it's appropriate under Idaho Code 195307 of $5,000 per victim on each of the 3 victims as a civil penalty. And then finally, the restitution, which was requested by the state. Mr. Wood, if you could reiterate that number, $22,000, of what the restitution term is, And I want to inquire if there's any other restitution being sought by the state.
Thank you, Your Honor. I believe I said $22,545. And the state would ask for an additional 30 days to submit any further restitution for the victims, living victims who have been deemed as such by this court.
The court will assess that restitution on the grand theft charge of $22,545 as shown through the evidence at trial. And the court will allow 30 days for additional restitution requests, but that will be waived if it's not submitted timely. That'll conclude the court's sentencing on the charges. Mr. Thomas, do you have any questions on the sentence?
No, Your Honor, thank you.
All right, Mr. Wood, do you have any questions?
No, thank you.
All right, counsel, before we conclude, and Ms. Vallow, importantly, I need to advise you of the rights you have now. You do have the right to appeal to the Idaho Supreme Court from this judgment of conviction, and you have a right to be represented by an attorney if you appeal. You're also advised if you can't afford an attorney, an attorney will be appointed for you at public expense, and you only have 42 days to file an appeal. You also have the right to seek relief from my judgment under Idaho Criminal Rule 35. You have 120 days to file that motion if you believe a correction or reduction of this sentence is appropriate because it was either illegal or too harsh. And finally, you may also have rights to seek relief under the Idaho Uniform Post-Conviction Relief Act. Those actions have to be filed within 1 year from the day your right to appeal expires. Do you understand those appellate rights? All right, she acknowledged yes. The defendant will be required to submit DNA samples upon remand to the Idaho Department of Corrections. I'll ask the attorneys to please turn in any copies of the pre-sentence investigation reports or addenda so those can be kept in confidence and additional copies will be destroyed. And Ms. Vallow Daybell, you are hereby remanded to the custody of the Sheriff of Fremont County to be delivered to the proper authorities of the Idaho Department of Corrections for execution of this sentence. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. That'll conclude our sentencing hearing.
You're just listening in there to the sentencing. We just learned that Lori Vallow Daybell sentenced to life in prison without parole, certainly serving those 3 life sentences consecutively. That was a big point of this trial right there, as you can see here on Live Now from Fox. As we continue to follow this, a very breaking story out of Idaho. Of course, they're sentenced guilty in May. Now the sentencing phase over. I do want to give you more of an update as we also look outside of the courtroom in Idaho, of course, awaiting Lori Vallow potential to be leaving these doors, also from defense and the prosecutors, potentially some remarks. We did see a podium up there just a little bit ago. Of course, the Idaho mother, Lori Vallow Daybell, sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole in the murders of her 2 youngest children and a romantic rival in the case that included bizarre claims that her son and daughter were zombies and that she was a goddess sent to usher in the biblical apocalypse. Lori Vallow Daybell was found guilty in May of killing her 2 youngest children, 7-year-old Joshua, or JJ, and 16-year-old Tylee Ryan, as well as conspiring to kill Tammy Daybell, her 5th husband's previous wife. Of course, the husband, Chad Daybell, is awaiting a trial on the same murder charges. Vallow also faces 2 other cases in Arizona, one on a charge of conspiring with her brother to kill her 4th husband, Charles Vallow, and one of conspiring to kill her niece's ex-husband. Charles Vallow was shot and killed in 2019, but her niece's ex survived an attempt later that year. Of course, hopefully we'll hear from our Fox 10 team, Justin Lum, as he has been breaking down this case from the very, very beginning. Now ramping up slowly as Lori Vallow Daybell sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Of course, some lawyers leaving the courtroom. This in Idaho, the courtroom right there. Plenty of media on the outside awaiting the departure potentially of Lori Vallow Daybell herself. She's now there in custody after being found guilty on this. We're just going to stick with this here, live, raw, and unfiltered as we continue on. Of course, there will likely be some shouts from reporters to Lori Vallow, some bizarre statements there at the very end during this sentencing, right before the judge did sentence her. Of course, she talked about saying that she, quote, "My kids are happy now in the spiritual world." She also said that JJ, one of her sons that she did kill and was convicted of killing, said JJ visited me after he passed away and said, quote, "You didn't do anything wrong, Mom." She also said, "I do not fear death, and I look forward to it." She also said, "I am homesick for heaven every day. Heaven is more wonderful than you can ever possibly imagine." So a very bizarre story here on Live Now from Fox. We've been following it very, very closely. Justin Lum doing a very, very great job with this. Of course, you can see this, the camera outside of the courtroom. We're just going to stick with this because we do not want to miss a moment here, but this is what we do as we tap dance awaiting this moment. We just saw the sentencing guidelines put in place by the judge there in Idaho as the Fremont County Courthouse in St. Anthony, Idaho. Judge Stephen W. Boyce heard testimony from several representatives of the victims, including Vallow Daybell's only surviving son, Colby Ryan. Of course, now you see a car pulling up, backing up here at this Fremont County Courthouse. Of course, Colby Ryan, whose statements were read by a prosecuting attorney there. They said in a statement, "Tylee will never have the opportunity to become a mother, wife, or have the career she was destined to have. JJ will never be able to grow and spread his light with the world the way he did." Of course, Ryan also wrote about his own grief. He said in a statement, "I have lost the opportunity to share life with the people of course, that I love most. I have lost my sister, father, brother, and mother," he wrote. "I pray for healing for everyone involved, including those who took the lives of everyone we loved." So still, you can see them backing up this vehicle here on Live Now from Fox. Let's just listen in real quick to see if we can hear anything, potentially seeing Lori leave the courtroom after being sentenced here to life in prison without parole.
You've got to be very devout. This is life.
So this is the scene outside of the courtroom as we currently await these potential departure of lawyers of Lori Vallow herself here on Live Now from Fox. Of course, I also want to put up this tweet as we continue on. Of course, this tweet coming in from our Fox 10 reporter, Justin Lum, who's been covering this one extensively since the very beginning. He said, "Lori Vallow walks out in her shackles. Kay and Larry hug. We are done." So certainly the culmination of a lot of work there from Justin Lum. Great reporting from him. Back out to this Fremont County Courthouse as we await the moment. You can see this vehicle there where Lori Vallow Daybell will depart after being sentenced to life in prison. You can see just people there on hand, reporters and just community members alike. They're getting a better vantage point as it looks like this is the side Lori Vallow Daybell will get into the vehicle. So they're just getting a better vantage point here as they're covering this one from St. Anthony, Idaho. So still awaiting the departure after being sentenced there to life in prison without parole. If you're just joining us here on Live Now from Fox, I am Andy Mack. Of course, we were watching the sentencing, the statement, a bizarre case that is potentially finally coming to a close there in Idaho. Of course, there were other trials taking place in Arizona upcoming, of course, facing similar charges. Let's just listen into this moment here on Live Now from Fox. It looks like any moment right now we could see Lori Vallow Daybell leave the courtroom after this sentencing taking place. You can see this vehicle now going to back up in a different direction here that we continue to follow. So, of course, I want to continue just to give you some insight into what we know on this case. We've spoken extensively with our Fox 10 reporter, Justin Lum, about this case, about this trial, about this tragedy. Of course, I do want to give you the update one more time as the Idaho mother, Lori Vallow Daybell, sentenced Monday to life in prison without parole in the murders of her two youngest children and also a romantic arrival in a case that was bizarre, to say the least, that included her son, daughter, they said were zombies, and that she was a goddess sent to usher in the biblical apocalypse. Of course, it doesn't look like our photographer expects them to walk out of that one now. They're heading back to the podium, awaiting this potential remarks from lawyers as well.